I asked when the wedding was, thinking we still had time to prepare. But then, out of nowhere, my daughter-in-law dropped the bombshell. We got married yesterday. What happened next? Keep watching to find out. It was a sunny afternoon. The kind of day when the family gathers together for a casual meal. The atmosphere was light, with laughter echoing through the house. As usual, the conversation flowed easily, jumping from one topic to another, with everyone sharing stories about their week, recent experiences, and upcoming plans. I was sitting at the table, enjoying the chatter, when I suddenly realized that there was one question I had been meaning to ask my daughter-in-law for a while. So, when is the wedding going to happen? It seemed like a simple enough question. After all, we had been talking about her wedding for months. She and my son had been together for a few years, and the topic of marriage had come up numerous times. They had mentioned the possibility of getting married in a quiet ceremony, just the two of them, or perhaps in a larger, more traditional event with the whole family involved. I was excited, of course, but also curious to know more details. The last I had heard, they were still in the planning stages, figuring out the venue, dates, and even guest lists. But it was the kind of question that felt like it had been lingering in the air for too long. I thought it was time to get a definitive answer. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who was sitting next to my son. She was smiling, as always, radiating that warmth that always made everyone feel comfortable. She had an air of calm confidence, which I admired. But as I asked the question, I noticed a brief flicker of surprise in her eyes, almost as if she hadn't expected me to ask so directly. She paused for a moment, exchanging a quick glance with my son. And then, without missing a beat, she replied in a way that I never could have anticipated. "We got married yesterday," she said casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. My brain struggled to process the words. What? I thought to myself. My mind raced. Had I missed something? Was there a secret ceremony I wasn't aware of? Was this a joke? The air in the room seemed to freeze for a moment as everyone else fell silent, waiting for my reaction. I stared at her in disbelief, trying to make sense of what she had just said. For a second, I felt like the room was spinning. I quickly glanced at my son, looking for confirmation. His face mirrored the same shock I was feeling. He had a small, sheepish grin on his face, as if he too was trying to figure out how to react to the unexpected news. My heart began to race, and 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind. How could they keep such a huge thing a secret from the rest of the family? Was it a spur-of-the-moment decision? Or had they been planning it for months and just didn't tell anyone? It wasn't anger or frustration that filled me in that moment, but pure confusion. This wasn't what I had expected to hear. I had always imagined the wedding would be a big celebration, a day that the whole family would be involved in, a day where we'd all come together to celebrate their love. Instead, here I was, learning that my son and his wife had taken a huge step in their relationship without so much as a whisper of warning. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. But as the initial shock wore off, a mix of emotions began to bubble up. The moment the words left my daughter-in-law's lips, a strange silence filled the room. My brain couldn't immediately grasp what she had said. "We got married yesterday," she had casually announced. But those words felt like a bombshell that had just exploded in the middle of a peaceful family gathering. For a split second, time seemed to slow down. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. How could this be possible? How had I not known? I had spent so much time talking about their future plans, their dreams, their ideas about the wedding, and yet none of that had prepared me for the shock I was feeling now. I turned to my son, who had been sitting quietly beside her. His face was a mixture of surprise and awkwardness, as if he too was unsure how to respond to the situation. There was a brief moment where our eyes locked, and in that instant, I could see the same bewilderment reflected in his gaze. It wasn't that I was angry. At least not at first, it was just sheer disbelief. This was not how I had imagined hearing the news. The wedding had always been a big topic of conversation, full of details and excitement. How had I missed the planning of something this monumental? I had expected an invitation, perhaps an engagement party, or at least some kind of heads up. But instead, I was left standing in the midst of this family gathering. Hearing about their wedding like it was just another casual event. As my mind tried to make sense of it, I realized that I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was the initial shock, of course, but underneath that, a wave of hurt began to rise. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been left out of something important, something significant. How could they have kept this from me? Was it intentional? Had they simply forgotten to mention it? Or had they made a decision to keep it a secret? I could feel my heart rate quicken, and a knot formed in my stomach as I tried to hold back the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I watched as my daughter-in-law sat there, seemingly unfazed by the tension in the room, as if this was something she had already processed and accepted. My son, on the other hand, seemed a little more uncomfortable. He cleared his throat awkwardly, as if trying to figure out the best way to explain. He finally spoke, but his words only added to the confusion. It was a small ceremony, he said, almost as if it were meant to reassure me. Just us. A few close friends. We didn't want a big fuss. It was spontaneous. Spontaneous. The word hit me like a jolt of electricity. Was this really what had happened? Had they truly decided to get married in such an unexpected, private way without any of us knowing? The idea of it felt surreal. I had always imagined their wedding would be a joyous occasion, something the entire family could celebrate together. Instead, I was hearing about it as if it were a passing detail in their lives. I tried to process the words, but the more I thought about it, the more questions surfaced. Why hadn't they told us? Was it a decision made in the heat of the moment? Or had they been planning it for a while, with no intention of letting anyone in on the secret? As the shock began to settle into a dull ache in my chest, I found myself wondering how I would move forward from this moment. Would I be able to celebrate with them in the way I had imagined? Or had I missed my chance? It was clear that there was more to this story than I understood, and I was left grappling with a sense of betrayal I hadn't anticipated. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there had to be more to this than just a spontaneous decision. I couldn't understand how my son and daughter-in-law had managed to keep this huge life event a secret, especially when it seemed so out of character for them. Over the years, we had always been a family that shared everything: the big moments, the little milestones, the everyday ups and downs. They knew how important family was to me, and I knew they valued our support and involvement. So why had they kept this a secret? Had I somehow missed something? Or was there a deeper reason behind their decision to withhold such news? As my mind churned with possibilities, I began to wonder if it was really as spontaneous as they had made it sound. Could it have been a last-minute decision, made on a whim in the midst of everyday life? Or had they planned this quietly for months, never mentioning it, knowing all along that they would choose not to involve anyone else? The more I reflected on their personalities, the more I realized that neither of them were particularly secretive or prone to keeping things hidden from the family. In fact, both of them had always been open and communicative about their plans, dreams, and goals. So why, for this one monumental moment, had they chosen silence? I glanced at my son again, who was still sitting there awkwardly, unsure of how to explain. He had always been a thoughtful person, someone who valued honesty and openness. Yet here he was, sitting next to his wife with an expression that was a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. It was clear to me that he didn't know how to ease the tension in the room or answer the growing list of questions running through my mind. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then closed it again, his words failing him. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke again, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Mom," he said. "It wasn't about keeping it from you. We just didn't want to make a big deal out of it. We wanted something simple, something just for us." His words hung in the air like an unanswered question. Just for us. I could understand that. After all, every couple deserves their moment of intimacy and privacy. But why hadn't they found a way to balance that privacy with sharing such a meaningful event with their family. I wasn't asking for an extravagant celebration, nor was I expecting some huge, formal wedding with all the bells and whistles. I understood their desire for simplicity, but there was something about the secrecy of it all that didn't sit right with me. I found myself wondering if perhaps I had been too caught up in my own expectations, too focused on the idea of a traditional wedding with family, friends, and all the familiar rituals. Maybe they had been thinking about their future together in a way that didn't involve everyone else's opinions or expectations. Perhaps they simply wanted to experience this milestone without the pressure of pleasing anyone but themselves. But even as I tried to rationalize their decision, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. Why had they chosen to keep it all so quiet? Was it just about wanting to avoid the fuss? Or was there something more personal at play? As much as I tried to understand, a part of me couldn't help but feel as though I was being left out of something far more important than I had realized. The lack of explanation, the absence of details, left me with more questions than answers. And with each passing moment, the desire to know the full story grew stronger. I wasn't sure if I would ever get all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this secret pass without understanding the deeper reasons behind it. As the initial shock began to fade, I found myself grappling with a tangled web of emotions that I hadn't anticipated. What had started as a moment of disbelief slowly morphed into something more complex: hurt, confusion, and even a sense of loss. I had always imagined that moments like these, big milestones in life, would be shared with the people who mattered most. The wedding, the celebration of love, the unity of two people coming together. These were the events where family was meant to come together and witness the beginning of a new chapter. Instead, I was left trying to piece together the reasons for their secrecy. And that's when the underlying emotions began to surface. I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal, not in the traditional sense, but in a more subtle way. It wasn't that I was angry at them, it was more a feeling of being excluded from something important, something that I had always thought would involve the family. Over the years, my son and daughter-in-law had always been open with us about their lives, their dreams, and their plans. So, when I learned that they had chosen to marry without involving the family, it felt like a betrayal of the openness we had always shared. It wasn't just about the wedding itself. It was about the fact that this was an event that I had expected to be a part of, to witness, to celebrate with them. Instead, I felt like I had been left outside in the cold, unaware of their plans until it was too late. But as I continued to reflect, I began to realize that my feelings weren't just about the secrecy. There was something deeper at play: a fear of being left behind, of no longer being needed or included in the lives of the people I loved. Watching my son and daughter-in-law take such a significant step without me made me confront the reality that life was changing. And that change was inevitable. They were building their own lives, their own family, and perhaps they didn't need to share every step of that journey with me. It was a harsh realization, one that struck me harder than I had expected. The truth was, this wasn't just about the wedding, it was about my place in their lives. And the way that place seemed to be shifting. As much as I wanted to understand their reasons, a part of me struggled with the idea that they had made such a big decision without any regard for how it would affect the family. I had always believed that the strength of our bond lay in our ability to share our lives, our joys, and our sorrows. But now, I was forced to face the reality that my son and daughter-in-law had made a choice that didn't involve me. And that stung more than I cared to admit. Despite the hurt and confusion, I knew I had to let go of some of my expectations. They were adults, making decisions that were best for them, and it wasn't my place to dictate how they should live their lives. I had to accept that their choices were theirs alone to make, even if I didn't fully understand them. But that didn't make the feelings of exclusion any easier to deal with. I couldn't help but feel as though something precious had slipped away, and the grief of that loss lingered in the corners of my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. not just for my son and daughter-in-law, but for me as well. It was a reminder that families change, relationships evolve, and sometimes, the people we love the most make decisions that challenge the way we've always seen the world. It was a difficult pill to swallow, but I knew that in time, I would have to accept it. The love and bond I shared with my son and daughter-in-law weren't dependent on every detail being shared or every moment being witnessed by me. They were still my family, and that was something that would never change no matter how different their journey looked from mine. As the days passed, the initial sting of surprise began to subside, and I found myself slowly coming to terms with the news. At first, the feelings of exclusion and confusion had been overwhelming. But with time, I began to reflect on the bigger picture. Yes, their decision to marry without involving the family had caught me off guard. But I also realized that my role in their lives was evolving. It wasn't about them excluding me. It was about them taking a step forward in their journey as a couple. They were creating their own path, and I had to respect that, even if it meant that I was no longer at the center of every decision. My son and daughter-in-law had always been thoughtful people. Their decision, as difficult as it was for me to understand at first, was clearly made with love and care. They hadn't kept the wedding a secret out of malice or disregard for our family. It was a choice they made to preserve their intimacy and to honor what felt right for them. I began to understand that sometimes the most significant moments in life are the ones that don't need to be shared with everyone. They didn't need an elaborate wedding to validate their love for each other. And perhaps, in some ways, their desire for simplicity and privacy was a reflection of their maturity and commitment to each other. Although it took some time for me to process, I came to realize that this was not about being left behind or excluded. It was about change. Life was always going to evolve. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the past and the ways things had been, I had to accept that things were shifting. They were no longer the young couple we had all watched grow together. They were partners now, standing side by side, making their own decisions, and creating a life together. The more I thought about it, the more I saw that their choice to marry privately was an act of courage and independence, not one of rebellion or defiance. Gradually, my perspective started to shift. The hurt and sense of betrayal I had initially felt began to dissolve, replaced with a quiet sense of pride. I had raised my son to be a thoughtful, independent person who could make decisions for himself. This was his life, his love, and his future. If he and his wife felt that a quiet, private wedding was the right choice for them, then I needed to honor that decision, even if it wasn't the way I would have chosen to celebrate. In the end, it became clear to me that love wasn't about grand gestures or elaborate celebrations. It wasn't about sharing every moment with everyone or following a prescribed path to validation. Love was about respect, understanding, and supporting each other in the ways that felt true to the individuals involved. My son and daughter-in-law's marriage was no different. It was their love story, written in a way that was authentic to them. And though I had not been part of the ceremony itself, that didn't mean I wasn't a part of their journey. I realized that my love for them, and theirs for me, didn't need to be defined by any one event. It was something that would endure through the years, through every change, every milestone, and every moment, whether shared or kept private. As I made peace with their decision, I found myself embracing this new chapter in their lives with an open heart. They had taken a leap into the future, and while it had caught me by surprise, I knew that their commitment to each other was real, and that their bond would only grow stronger. My role as a parent and as a family member might look different now, but it didn't diminish the love I had for them or the support I would always offer. I was ready to celebrate their love, not in the way I had originally imagined, but in the way that felt right for them. And in that, I found my peace. If you enjoyed this story and want to stay updated on more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You won't want to miss out on future stories and insights. Subscribe now and join the journey.